So my mother-in-law literally screamed at me during Sunday dinner that I ruined her son's life, and he should have married his ex-girlfriend Maria instead. This happened right after my husband and I announced I was pregnant with our first child. The whole family just sat there in shock while she went off about how Maria was perfect and I trapped her precious boy. I'm still processing what happened because honestly I thought we had a decent relationship before this. Turns out she's been secretly arranging meetups between my husband and Maria behind my back for years. Now I'm pregnant, humiliated, and my husband is caught in the middle trying to defend his mother's behavior. So I'm Rebecca, 28F teacher. I've been married to my husband Jake for 3 years now, and we just found out we're expecting our first baby. I was so excited to share the news with his family because I genuinely thought his mom Linda liked me well enough. Looking back, there were definitely some red flags I ignored. She always brought up his ex-girlfriend Maria in conversations, talking about how successful she was becoming as a lawyer, and how she always asked about Jake. I figured it was just harmless small talk since they all went to high school together in their small town. Linda would make little comments here and there about how different I was from what she expected for Jake. She'd mention how Maria shared the same interests as their family, grew up in the same church, knew all the same people. But she was never outright rude, so I brushed it off as typical mother-in-law stuff. Jake always seemed uncomfortable when his mom brought up Maria, but he never really shut it down either. He'd just change the subject or make some joke about his mom living in the past. I thought he was just being diplomatic and keeping the peace. We'd been trying for a baby for about 6 months, so when that pregnancy test finally showed 2 lines, we were over the moon. Jake suggested we tell his parents first since they lived nearby, and we saw them every Sunday for dinner. I was nervous but excited, thinking this would finally cement my place in the family. Boy, was I wrong about that. Sunday dinner at Jake's parents' house was usually pretty routine. We'd arrive around 4, help set the table, chat about work and local gossip while Linda finished cooking. That particular Sunday in June felt special because Jake and I had this huge secret we were dying to share. I kept touching my still flat stomach throughout dinner, barely able to contain my excitement. Jake kept giving me these knowing looks across the table, and I could tell he was just as eager to make the announcement. His dad Robert was going on about some issue at the hardware store he managed, and Linda was fussing over whether everyone had enough potatoes. After we finished eating, Jake cleared his throat and said he had some news to share. I pulled out the ultrasound photos we'd gotten that Friday, my hands actually shaking a little from nerves and excitement. Linda looked curious, maybe even hopeful, as Jake announced that we were expecting our first baby. I slid the ultrasound picture across the table toward her, expecting squeals of joy or at least a smile. Instead, Linda's face went completely cold. She stared at the photo for what felt like forever, and the whole room went quiet. Robert looked confused, glancing between his wife and the ultrasound image. Then Linda pushed the photo away from her like it was contaminated. She looked directly at me with this expression I'd never seen before, pure disgust mixed with anger. She told me I had ruined her son's life and that he should have married Maria instead. She said Maria would have given them beautiful grandchildren, not whatever this was going to be. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jake's jaw dropped, and he immediately started telling his mother that was completely inappropriate. But Linda wasn't done. She stood up from the table, pointing at me, and screamed that I had trapped Jake into marriage and now I was trapping him with a baby he probably didn't even want. She went on about how Maria was successful and classy, how she came from a good family that Linda had known for decades. She said I was just some outsider who swooped in and stole her son away from his real future. The whole time she was yelling, Robert just sat there looking mortified, and Jake kept trying to interrupt her. I felt completely frozen in my chair, one hand protectively over my stomach. This woman had just called my unborn child a mistake, and basically said I wasn't good enough for her family. Part of me wanted to scream back, but I was honestly too shocked to form words. Jake finally stood up and firmly told his mother to stop, that she was being cruel and unreasonable. Linda turned her anger on him then, saying he used to have such a bright future before he met me. She claimed Maria still asked about him, and wondered what could have been if I hadn't interfered. The dinner ended with Jake grabbing my hand and telling his parents we were leaving. As we walked to the car, I could hear Linda crying dramatically inside, probably playing the victim for Robert. The ultrasound photos were still sitting on their dining room table, abandoned like the relationship I thought we had. That night back at our house, I was still in complete shock from what had happened. I kept replaying Linda's words in my head, the way she looked at me with such hatred. Jake was pacing around our living room, running his hands through his hair and muttering about how his mother had lost her mind. I asked him if he had any idea his mom felt this way about me, and he swore he didn't. He said she'd made a few comments about Maria over the years, but he never thought it meant anything serious. He tried to convince me that his mother was just shocked by the pregnancy news and didn't handle it well. Jake suggested we give Linda a few days to cool off, then maybe she'd come around and apologize. He said she probably didn't mean what she said, that it was just an emotional reaction. I wanted to believe him, but something felt really off about the whole situation. Later that evening, Jake went to take a shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. I wasn't trying to snoop, but it lit up with a text notification from his mom. The preview showed something about Maria asking about him again, which seemed weird timing considering what had just happened. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I was still so hurt and confused that I picked up his phone. What I found made my stomach drop. There were months and months of texts between Jake and his mother, all about Maria. Linda had been telling Jake whenever Maria was in town, suggesting he should grab coffee with her to catch up. The messages went back almost 2 years. Way longer than I would have expected for casual updates about an ex. Linda would send Jake Maria's new job announcements, photos from her social media, even details about her dating life. She'd ask if Jake ever wondered what might have been different. What really got to me was seeing Jake's responses. He wasn't exactly encouraging his mother, but he wasn't shutting her down either. He'd give non-committal replies or just change the subject. A few times, he'd even agreed to meet Maria for coffee when she was visiting her parents. I confronted Jake when he got out of the shower, asking him about all these secret coffee dates with his ex. He looked genuinely surprised that I'd found the messages, but then he got defensive. He said they were just friendly meetups, nothing romantic, and that he didn't want to hurt his mother's feelings by refusing. Jake tried to explain that Maria was part of his childhood friend group, so it wasn't weird to see her occasionally. But I pointed out that he'd never mentioned any of these coffee meetings to me, which made them feel pretty secretive. He admitted that was probably wrong, but insisted nothing inappropriate had ever happened. I asked him why his mother was so invested in maintaining his connection with Maria, and Jake claimed he honestly didn't know. He said his mom had always been a little too involved in his personal life, but he never thought she was actively trying to sabotage our marriage. The next morning, I asked Jake to meet me at our usual coffee shop downtown before I had to go to work. I'd spent most of the night thinking about everything, and I needed to have a serious conversation away from our house where we might get distracted. I brought my laptop with me because I'd done something I probably shouldn't have. After finding those texts on Jake's phone, I'd gone through his Facebook messages and email to see if there was more I didn't know about. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Jake arrived looking tired and stressed, probably expecting me to still be upset about his mother's outburst. He ordered his usual coffee and sat across from me, asking if I was feeling okay with the pregnancy and everything that had happened. I opened my laptop and showed him what I'd discovered. There were Facebook messages going back to right after we got engaged, with Linda sending Jake old photos of him and Maria from high school. She'd write things about how happy they looked together, how natural they seemed as a couple. In his email, I found forwarded job postings that Linda thought Maria might be interested in, all for positions in our city. She'd even sent Jake Maria's new address when she moved closer to us last year, suggesting he should welcome her to the neighborhood. Jake's face went pale as he scrolled through everything I'd found. He kept saying he didn't realize how extensive his mother's interference had been. He claimed he'd just been trying to keep the peace by not confronting her directly about her obsession with Maria. I asked him point blank if he'd ever considered getting back together with Maria during any of these arranged meetups. Jake swore he hadn't, that he loved me and wanted our marriage to work. But he admitted that his mother had made several comments about Maria being available, and wondering if Jake was truly happy. The worst part was finding an email from just 3 months ago, where Linda had forwarded Jake an article about couples who realized they'd married the wrong person. She'd written a note saying it was never too late to correct past mistakes and find real happiness. Jake looked genuinely shocked reading that email, saying he'd deleted it without really processing what his mother was implying. He started to understand why I felt like there had been a campaign against our marriage that he'd been blind to. I told Jake that his mother's reaction to our pregnancy finally made sense in this context. She saw our baby as the final nail in the coffin of his potential reunion with Maria. Linda had probably been holding out hope that our marriage was temporary, and now she was panicking. Jake apologized for not recognizing what his mother was doing, and for not protecting me from her manipulation. He promised to confront Linda about her behavior, and set clear boundaries about Maria and our marriage. 2 days later, Jake and I drove back to his parents' house to demand an apology and establish some ground rules. I was nervous about facing Linda again, but I knew we couldn't just let her behavior slide, especially with a baby on the way. Robert answered the door and looked relieved to see us. He'd apparently been dealing with Linda's dramatics for the past 2 days, and she'd been playing the victim, claiming Jake and I had overreacted to her innocent comments about Maria. Linda was in the kitchen when we walked in, and she immediately started crying when she saw us. She ran over to Jake and hugged him, apologizing for getting emotional about the pregnancy news. But her apology was directed only at Jake, completely ignoring me standing right there. I interrupted her performance and told her we needed to talk about her inappropriate comments and her years of trying to reconnect Jake with his ex-girlfriend. Linda's fake tears dried up pretty quickly, and she got defensive, saying she'd only ever wanted what was best for her son. Jake showed his mother the evidence we'd compiled of her interference in our marriage. Linda tried to dismiss it as harmless concern for Jake's happiness, but Robert looked increasingly uncomfortable as he saw the extent of her meddling. Linda then made the mistake of doubling down on her position. She told me directly that I had trapped Jake into marriage, and that Maria would have been a better choice for their family. She said Maria understood their values and traditions in a way I never could. That's when Jake's cousin Emma, who had been quietly washing dishes in the kitchen, spoke up. She told Linda she'd recorded the entire screaming incident from Sunday dinner on her phone, and was considering posting it on social media, to show everyone how Linda really treated her daughter-in-law. Linda's face went white when she realized her public meltdown had been captured on video. Emma played back a few seconds of the recording, and hearing Linda's cruel words again made me feel sick all over again. The audio was crystal clear, including Linda's comment about our baby being a mistake. Emma told Linda that several family members had been talking about her obsession with Jake and Maria for years, and they were all disgusted by how she treated me. She said if Linda didn't apologize immediately and stop her campaign against our marriage, the video would be shared with everyone they knew. Robert finally found his voice and told his wife that her behavior was unacceptable. He said he'd been too passive about her interference in Jake's life, but seeing the evidence of her manipulation had opened his eyes. Linda started crying again, but these seemed like real tears of panic rather than her earlier performance. She realized that her secret campaign against me was now public knowledge among the family, and she was facing real consequences for her actions. That same evening, Linda called Jake in tears, begging him to come back over so they could talk privately. She claimed she had something important to show him that would explain her behavior. Against my better judgment, Jake decided we should go back and hear her out. When we arrived, Linda had spread out dozens of old photo albums on the dining room table. She started showing Jake pictures from his childhood, pointing out how close they'd always been and how much she'd sacrificed for him. But as Jake looked through the photos more carefully, he started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. In picture after picture, Linda was physically positioned between Jake and other people, including his father, friends, and eventually girlfriends. There were photos from Jake's high school graduation where Linda had somehow maneuvered herself into every shot with Jake, even the ones that were supposed to be just him and his friends. In his college photos, Linda appeared in way more pictures than seemed normal for a parent visiting campus. Jake found photos from his and Maria's prom, and Linda was in half of them, despite not being a chaperone. There were even pictures of Linda at parties and events that were supposed to be for Jake's peer group, where she clearly didn't belong. The most disturbing photos were from Jake's early dating years. Linda had somehow managed to insert herself into romantic moments, like when Jake took Maria to a school dance, or when he brought other girlfriends to family events. She was always there, always watching, always positioning herself as the most important woman in Jake's life. Jake started asking his mother why she was in so many photos where she didn't belong, and Linda got flustered. She tried to explain that she just wanted to document his important moments, but Jake could see the pattern of invasive behavior going back decades. Robert quietly admitted that he tried to talk to Linda about giving Jake more space over the years, but she'd always insisted she was just being a loving mother. He said he'd given up fighting about it because it caused too many arguments. Linda then made her biggest mistake of the evening. She told Jake that Maria had never minded her involvement and had actually appreciated having a mother figure who cared so much. She said Maria understood that family came first, unlike me. Jake finally snapped and told his mother that her behavior was controlling and inappropriate. He said he was starting to understand why several of his past relationships had ended badly, and why I'd been feeling uncomfortable around her even before the pregnancy announcement. Linda tried to manipulate Jake by crying and saying she'd only ever loved him and wanted him to be happy. But Jake told her that real love meant respecting his choices and supporting his marriage, not trying to sabotage it. He made it clear that if Linda couldn't respect me as his wife and the mother of his child, then she wouldn't be welcome in our lives or our baby's life. Linda's tears turned to panic as she realized she was about to lose access to her son entirely. The following week, Jake and I were trying to get back to normal and focus on the positive aspects of our pregnancy. We'd started looking at baby furniture online and talking about converting our spare room into a nursery. It felt good to concentrate on our future instead of his mother's drama. That peaceful feeling ended when Linda showed up at our front door unannounced on Thursday evening. She was carrying a bag of baby clothes and acting like nothing had happened between us. She walked right past me when I opened the door and started talking to Jake about how excited she was to be a grandmother. Jake immediately told his mother that she couldn't just show up without calling first, especially after everything that had happened. Linda acted confused, saying she thought we'd worked everything out and that family should always be welcome. She started unpacking the baby clothes she brought, explaining how they were Jake's outfits from when he was a newborn. She said she'd been saving them for decades, waiting for him to have children. It was clearly a manipulation tactic designed to make Jake feel guilty about setting boundaries. I told Linda that while the gesture was nice, we needed her to respect our space and call before visiting. She completely ignored me and continued talking only to Jake, asking about doctor appointments and due dates as if I wasn't even there. Jake stepped in and told his mother that her behavior toward me was still unacceptable. He said until she could apologize sincerely and treat me with respect, she wasn't welcome in our home. Linda's fake cheerfulness cracked, and she started getting defensive again. She accused me of turning Jake against his own family, and said I was being vindictive by keeping her away from her grandchild. Linda claimed she'd already apologized enough, and that I was being unreasonable by holding grudges. Jake firmly told his mother that she hadn't actually apologized to me at all, and that her apology to him had been hollow since she immediately went back to insulting me. He said until she could acknowledge how badly she treated me and commit to changing her behavior, she needed to leave. Linda tried one last manipulation tactic, crying and saying she was afraid she'd never get to meet her grandchild. She begged Jake not to punish her for one moment of emotional reaction, conveniently forgetting about the years of interference we'd discovered. Jake walked his mother to the door and told her clearly that the ball was in her court. If she wanted a relationship with us and our baby, she needed to genuinely apologize to me and prove she could respect our marriage. Until then, she wasn't welcome in our home or our lives. After Linda left, Jake and I had a long conversation about boundaries and protecting our growing family. He apologized again for not seeing his mother's manipulation sooner and promised to prioritize our marriage and our child's well-being over keeping his mother happy. Epilogue. It's been 6 months since that whole disaster, and I'm now 7 months pregnant with a healthy baby girl. Linda never did apologize properly or change her behavior, so she's been completely cut off from our lives. Jake struggled with the decision at first, but he's been amazing about maintaining our boundaries. We heard through Robert that Linda still brings up Maria regularly and continues to believe that Jake made a mistake marrying me. She apparently tells people that I'm keeping her away from her grandchild out of spite, playing the victim role perfectly. Robert has actually become more involved in our lives since we cut Linda out. He comes over for dinner sometimes and is genuinely excited about becoming a grandfather. He's admitted that Linda's controlling behavior affected their marriage too, and he's considering couples therapy. Jake and I are stronger than ever, and I'm so grateful he finally saw his mother's manipulation for what it was. We're focused on preparing for our daughter and building the kind of healthy family environment we want her to grow up in. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the most necessary ones.